maybe I only introduce you in few words. Mm-hmm. Anyway, everybody know you here. So you have incredible credits. Among them, you have Pocahontas and Mulan, and also The Prince of Egypt. But you also contributed to the scripts of Shrek and The Road of El Dorado. Mm-hmm. Your background is deeply musical. You can say you even worked as a professional violinist. Right. So working in a field of musical is not a coincidence for you?
True.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe we should start from music.
Sure. But what I am going to do, though, is to talk about screenwriting and about myself, but using Pocahontas as an example for virtually everything, since you just saw Pocahontas. But I'm going to begin with the one thing that doesn't handle with Pocahontas. When I left Disney to go to DreamWorks, it was on the occasion of a big upheaval between the heads of Disney, and Jeffrey Katzenberg became the head of DreamWorks. And so there was an initial meeting. DreamWorks was going to be a company that Jeffrey Katzenberg and Steven Spielberg started. And the very first meeting of DreamWorks, Steven Spielberg asked Jeffrey Katzenberg, I've made my own animated features, but for some reason they don't rise to the level of the Disney animated features. Are there any secrets? And Jeffrey said, well, yes, there actually are 3 secrets that Walt Disney had when choosing what story to make into a movie. And he told him the 3 secrets. And then Steven Spielberg said, oh, you mean like the Moses story, like the 10 Commandments? And Jeffrey said, that's going to be our next movie. So that was how they decided to make The Prince of Egypt. And the 3 secrets were a universal theme, marquee value, and the morality of the story. And the universal theme is pretty obvious. It is that Walt Disney wanted a story in which the theme resonated with everyone in the audience, not just, a 50-year-old accountant having a midlife crisis, or, a ballerina who had an injury, but something that spoke to every person in the audience. So therefore, they were very basic themes of love, love between, either people or a mother and daughter, father and son, but universal. The marquee value, the marquee is the sign outside the movie theater, which gives you the title of the movie. And Walt Disney actually wanted, in his early movies, for the potential audience to walk past the movie theater, to look up at the sign and see the title, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, Pocahontas, and know what the story was. It's a little controversial these days because it sounds uncreative. It sounds as if it's just crass commercialism, which I guess it is. But it's the reason, even to this day, why there are so many sequels, why there are 800 Marvel comic book movies, because in order to sell tickets, really, the audience needs to know what they're going to see. And yet, as I always say when people splutter and say, but this is horrible, I don't like this at all, that the very origins of drama when the ancient Greeks first started writing and performing tragedies and comedies in front of their audience in the amphitheaters, they didn't choose stories which no one had ever heard before, with twists and turns and unexpected surprises, where they were keeping their audience on the heels of their seats with something that they weren't expecting. They were writing plays about legends, myths, history that the audience knew every single beat of. But It was how they told it. That was the important thing. Also, anybody who has children knows that if there's a movie which a child loves, they will watch it on the TV set over and over and over again, 100 times. And it's not because they're surprised at a certain point about what happens next. It is because they love how the story was told. And the last thing, I will let you have questions. The last thing is the morality. He wanted the audience to leave the feeling of the theater feeling better about themselves and feeling better about other people than when they came in. There are great films that crush the human soul and make people feel miserable when they leave the theater, but that's not what Walt Disney wanted. So the story, and then I'll let you have a question. The origin of Pocahontas was at Disney. There was a thing called the Gong Show. The Gong Show was a sleazy, corny game show a long time ago, in which anyone who was in the animation department could get up and pitch an idea for a movie for about 2 minutes to the three heads of animation, to Michael Eisner at the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and Roy Disney, who was Walt Disney's nephew. And there was a young story artist who came up in front of this group and held up this drawing that he had made of a young Indian girl in a canoe surrounded by animals and said, Pocahontas. And from the back of the room, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, that's our next movie. Exactly. He was a decisive man. Yeah. You had a question.
And at this moment, we should probably mention the very specific time in the Disney studios. It was just after The Little Mermaid, after Beauty and the Beast, also The Lion King. So it was just amazing time when every summer Disney got a hit in cinemas.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, it was before The Lion King came out. The way that I was hired was I was working on a TV show on the Disney lot, and the TV season, hiring season had started, and I had written a spec Seinfeld script as an example. Yet again, you always had to do that no matter what for the next job. But I didn't know that this guy in the animation department, Kevin Bannerman, was looking for talent for the next film. And he came up to me and said, are you interested in working on Pocahontas for 8 weeks? And there was a time where animation was dying at Disney. The Black Cauldron nearly killed off animation. But when the new ownership came in, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg, they gave it another shot. And first of all, it was Rescuers Down Under, but then what really rescued animation was The Little Mermaid. And then Aladdin, was that the next one?
Aladdin was the next
one. Yeah,
one.
and I love them because I came from musicals, and they were musicals, and they were done on the Broadway musical format with the songs integrated into the stories, with advancing the character and so forth. So I was thrilled at the thought of working on one of these shows, but 8 weeks was too long. I said, it's TV hiring season. I'm afraid I just can't do it. And then he came back to me, though, and said, how about 4 weeks? And I couldn't resist it. I said, okay, 4 weeks, I'll work on it. I started, and then the 4 weeks turned into 8 weeks, turned into 4 months, turned into 4 years. I couldn't escape. When I was hired, as you probably all saw, there were actually 3 writers. And each one of us was hired at the same time to do something specific. I was hired as the comedy writer because I came at this time from sitcoms. I was writing comedies. Carl Binder was hired to do action, adventure, and Susanna Grant, who went on to do Erin Brockovich, was hired to do teenage romance. But the first time we met, we said, this is ridiculous. We're writers. We don't write individual lines, So we, from that point on, decided that we would work as a team, that whatever disagreements we had within the room, we would keep to ourselves. Outside of the room, we would speak with united voice. And actually, we weren't even given a room initially. We were just put on a desk amidst all of the other story artists. But we were so loud that they, within a couple of days, they said, we can't have him out there. So we got our own office just because we were so disruptive. And I'm very thankful because we became very good friends. We worked on the movie from the beginning to, I was the last one on the movie, but almost all the way through the end, we were working as a team. And if it weren't for the fact that I started off working as partners with writers, I don't think I could have survived the years of writing other animated features, both at Disney and DreamWorks. It's really brutal. It's very, very tough. And I learned to become sort of hardened and learn the ways of animation by working with the group.
Large-scale production work requires a team very big, over like 100 people.
Over 500 people.
Over 500
and, you know,
people.
if you saw the credits,
yeah.
It's so funny for me to see the credits because I know so many of those people. They're real people to me rather than just names.
So how do you cope with the mess and chaos that could
Well, it is a mess and chaos. You know, what's interesting is talking about universal theme. The first 3 weeks that we were on Pocahontas were spent in a room with the creative team. The creative team was about 30 people. It's directors and producers and story artists, the head of story, the editor, so forth. The head animator, about 30 people. We spent 3 weeks hammering out one sentence, and the sentence was the theme of the movie. And once we came up with this sentence, and you'd think I would have memorized that sentence, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. But it was something like, you know, love can bring two warring tribes together or something like that. Once we came up with that sentence, it was posted on every bulletin board, over every door, every room had the theme. And we mocked this relentlessly at the time, saying, what a waste of time, what a stupid thing. But looking back, actually, it was really a creative, ingenious way to handle the problem of you start off making a movie with 500 people, and those 500 people are writing 500 different movies. The question is, at the end of the 4 years, that takes from the beginning to the end, how do you, at the end, have 500 people working on one movie? And the reason, what you do is you talk and you talk and you talk, and you talk about what the story is about, and you remind yourself every day what the story is about. And we came up, actually, I think, with a pretty well-constructed story. So well-constructed, actually, that James Cameron used it almost beat for Avatar, even to the point of having a talking willow tree, which I always took as a compliment rather than an insult, actually.
Yeah, you often say that work of screenwriter you compare to UN representative. So what do you mean? What kind of problems?
Well, for instance, I worked on Prince of Egypt as the writer of Prince of Egypt, the film, but also the writer of the book for Prince of Egypt, the musical that went on eventually to the West End, and which people can actually see. They filmed the London production. In the theater production, I was the creative voice. It was me and Stephen Schwartz. There was no one really above me. There was a producer, there was Universal Studios, but in theater, the writer has the last say. They can't change a word without my approval. So I had enormous creative freedom. I really enjoyed my time at Disney and DreamWorks and the other big studios, but you are not the auteur in the garret scribbling your masterpiece and then coming down to deliver your gems to the studio. Instead, I had an office at the studio. My day was filled with meetings of every sort: editorial, of course, the storyboard meetings, recording sessions, the character design meetings, every step of the way. And you would be given 20 minutes here and 30 minutes there to do rewrites, and there were rewrites every single day. I mean, for Pocahontas, we had a month or so to write the first draft. After that, it was just constant revisions. And the only person who knew what was going on in the story was the writer. I always said it was like a scientific experiment. If they could do the movie without a writer, they would. But they couldn't because the directors were busy from, you know, dawn to dusk doing all this technical stuff and rushing from rooms to rooms. And the various artists were off doing their sequences, which often had no relationship to the script whatsoever, but they would come up with their own little mini movies, and then you would have to eventually meld it into the script. There would be scenes, moments that were already animated right next to moments where you haven't even written it yet. So the movie on any given day was in various stages of development. And I was the only one, honestly, for Prince of Egypt and then for Pocahontas, the three of us, the only one who knew from day to day what the story was, what the script was actually doing. So you would have story meetings with 30 people. Every single one of these people would have notes, and your job as the writer really was to, besides contributing to those ideas, figure out what the consensus was and then get it down on paper.
Okay, so no surprises for anyone. You need to, like, everybody in the team should know what the film is about and what stage is the script. Yeah?
My writing for anything is no surprises. One of the big pitfalls of a beginning writer is they will come in with a meeting with the producer, and you'll talk about what the movie or the TV show is going to be. Then the writer goes off to the room and it says, oh, I have a great idea, and it's going to really surprise and shock everybody. They won't know what hit them. And you write it, and almost invariably, they are furious and incensed because that's not what they paid money for. I sincerely believe that you're in the room with the people who are paying you or giving the paycheck, that it is a collaborative art form, that you talk about what the vision of the story is, what the story is about, what the beats of the story was. Everybody comes to a consensus. Everybody is invested in the story. It is then the professional writer's job to go back and deliver what everybody thinks they're going to get. That's just the business. That's the business side of it. If you have a different idea, and you always have different ideas, if there are problems, if there are different routes, you call them up. You say, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? It's a pretty good motto, no surprises.
Okay. So let's get back to the music. Because working on a musical, animated musical, I suppose you get some songs before your work? Or
No.
No. Okay,
in a few instances, for instance, in Prince of Egypt, everybody knew how the movie was going to begin. It was going to begin with the musical. Yeah, I'm losing my voice. It was going to begin with the whole scene with Moses on the River Nile. So in that case, Stephen Schwartz wrote the song before I even started writing the script. But that's very unusual. The way I like to work, the way that Stephen Schwartz, who I've worked with a lot, likes to work is that I will write the entire movie or the entire show as a straight script. I don't worry about where the songs are going to go because that's not my job. It's the songwriter's job. Then the songwriter gets the script and musicalizes the scene. So, for instance, Colors of the Wind, which is, as I was talking to people out in the lobby, has become sort of an anthem in Poland. For that, we wrote the scene in which it was very overwritten and was very filled with monologues and so forth, the monologue of Pocahontas, but talking about, what she was saying to herself or to John Smith for Colors of the Wind. Around the River Bend is to herself. So it was written as a scene in dialogue, her talking to John Smith with all of these ideas. And then Stephen Schwartz would take that scene and then write the lyrics. And of course, for Pocahontas, it was Alan Menken who wrote the music. The way that Alan and Stephen worked, though, was somewhat different in that Alan would write the music first. They would agree on the title usually. Then he would write the music, and then Stephen would have to write lyrics to fit to the music. Other people are different. Elton John gets the lyrics for Aladdin, for Road to El Dorado, Tim Rice would write lyrics and then just mail them to Elton John. Heaven knows Elton John never came to any meetings. And then Elton John would sit down, write the songs in 20 minutes, and then that was it. There was no rewriting with Elton John. And as a matter of fact, I know they were working on Lion King while we were working on Pocahontas. When the Elton John songs came in, the directors looked at each other and producers into space said, what are we going to do with these little pop songs? They were really dismayed. But then Hans Zimmer, who was doing the arrangement, said, let me take care of it. And he added the African chorus, the percussion, the drum beat, all of the arrangement, and turned it into the songs that everybody knows. So, there are a lot of people working on these things.
Talking about the Lion King, we should mention that the audience in the half of the 90s expected actually the animal characters will be talking. And the most surprising fact about Pocahontas in the reviews in the 90s was that somehow animals don't talk. So I wonder what was the reason for that decision, and especially as you mentioned, those two creative teams were working in the same time, The Lion King and Pocahontas.
Well, the whole idea of The Lion King was that the animals were the main characters, but we had human beings, and not only that, but historical human beings as the main characters, and it just seemed that it didn't fit, that you'd have, wacky talking animals in addition to, the rather serious story that was going on. We do have a talking willow tree, though, so... but it's funny about the animals because people kept asking us, when are you going to write something for the animals? Because we kept saying, let's figure out John Smith and Pocahontas and Radcliffe. Let's figure out the humans first. But while we were writing the scripts, the story artists were writing gags for the animals. So a lot of what you see the animals are doing, we had nothing to do with it. That's totally the story artist coming up with, and you can see it over and over and over again, that there's this serious scene going on, and meanwhile, in the background, you see the raccoon is nibbling at a cookie, or the flit is falling off a waterfall, and being speared into the bottom of a canoe, and all that stuff is story artist stuff. When the animals intersected with the main story, then we had to write it in the story. It also reminds me of, for Mulan, there was a guy, Joe Grant, who was a story artist who was in his 90s, still came in every day, 8 hours a day, and he had worked on Snow White and Me. He was a Disney legend. And he would sit in the back of the room drawing a cricket. And he would just come up without talking, because artists often don't talk a lot, and just pin the cricket on the bulletin board. And I went up to him and I said, well, Joe, first of all, we have a dragon already, so I think we have enough animals. And second of all, there's already a very famous cricket, Jiminy Cricket. I really don't know if there's room for a cricket in this movie. And Joe Grant just smiled and kept on drawing his cricket. And of course, because he was Joe Grant, it came into the movie, and everybody loves the cricket. So for the big animated features, you are dealing with the artists, and the artists often contribute, as much as the writers do.
I'd like to ask you about the reduction of characters, reduction of subplots. I've heard that in Pocahontas you've had 3 animals. There was also the turkey. So how is the process of reduction going on?
That's really interesting. One of the things I often say is I encounter this more in Europe than I did in the US. But when I started at Pocahontas, I assumed that we'd have a lot of meetings with the marketing guys, and there would be research focus groups, that there'd be endless sort of scientific things that we had to listen to about how to tailor the audience, the movie to the demographics. There was none of that, ever. It was just people in a room saying, well, what's the best movie? What's the movie that we want to see? We were totally isolated from the marketing merchandising side. I was really looking forward to talking to the toy guys. Never got to talk to the toy guys. Later on, I'm working on, it's actually a Polish animated feature where one of it's a toy company, so the toy guy is in the room, and I talk toys nonstop, and I love it, but never got to do it at Disney. So yes, there was a turkey, and at some point, and it wasn't early on, we said, well, you know, we have a hummingbird and we have a raccoon. This turkey seems sort of over redundancy. So we cut the turkey, and we didn't realize it at the time, but Mattel, the toy company, had already designed the turkey, had already made this plush turkey models of what the toy would look like. They had spent a huge amount of money designing this toy, but when we decided to cut it, no one said a word. No one said a word about the fact they were losing massive amounts of money because we were cutting the turkey out. The same thing happened with the song. You know, originally, and many people probably know this, but when John Smith is tied up to the post in the tent and Pocahontas sneaks in, John Smith had a song, If I Never Met You. And it was going to be the first time Mel Gibson had ever sung in a movie. And they had also completely animated the scene and hired, I think it was Whitney Houston, to do the top 40 version of the song, because that was going to be the big ballad hit from Pocahontas. And she had already recorded it. It was all set to go. But we had just one preview. We had one preview of the movie. And I was always a little skeptical about this song because it came very late in the show. And I didn't love this song so much. But, you know, anyway, we went off to the preview, and it was an all-teenage audience. And I was petrified because teenagers, oh my God, the worst possible audience. But they loved the movie. They were with the movie every single minute until the moment when Pocahontas sneaked into the tent and John Smith opened his mouth and started to sing, If I Never. Instantly, kids were throwing popcorn at each other and little paper airplanes. They were off buying stuff at the concession stand. They were chatting. Totally lost the audience. And afterwards, we went outside and we looked at each other and said, the song's gone. Millions of dollars down the drain, but there was no question that, you know, in order to make the movie work, the song had to go. So in that sense, they were pretty ruthless about what had to be done.
Could you say something about the casting? That moment in the 90s, it was just the beginning of this idea of a star system in dubbing. Before that, in the Beauty and the Beast or in the Little Mermaid, there were no big stars in a dubbing. So why was this idea practiced
Because Jeffrey Katzenberg loved stars. He thought that people were stars for a reason. And he also realized that you could get stars for nothing, because the stars would do it for their kids. So he got all these people for, you know, Aladdin, so forth, to do recording for scale. And all these big stars came in thinking, well, you know, I'm going to say a few lines for an hour and then that's it. Not realizing that what they were in for was year after year, month after month of returning to the recording studio over and over and over again, by themselves. Very seldom were they with any other writers or actors, just saying one line over and over and over again. It was a huge amount of work for which they got paid scale. But then Robin Williams did Aladdin. And Aladdin, of course, some of it, not all of it. I mean, Ted and Terry wrote Aladdin were always furious that people said, well, you didn't have to do anything for Aladdin because Robin Williams made up his entire part. They said, no, we wrote the movie. The genie, yes. But he did improvise a certain number. And he said, okay, I'll do it as long as you don't use me to market the movie and as long as, you know, I'm not in advertising the voice and so forth. Well, Disney did use him in marketing, and they did use his voice and all sorts of other stuffs. And he was furious. And it was and then Lion King came out and made $1 billion, and suddenly stars said, we're doing this for scale? So it all changed. And now you have to pay huge amounts of money for the big movies for stars to do the voices. but the main reason, I always think it doesn't matter to a certain extent if a star is doing the voice or not, although Jeffrey Katzenberg always thought that a star was a star for a reason, that there was nobody better than a star to do the to do the voice. But what is true is that they help sell the film. If you have a big star, one, it helps give you credibility when you go out to talk to people selling the movie to distributors and so forth. And then they go on TV talk shows and they talk about the movie. So in that sense, they probably pay their own way.
Yeah, talking about actors, I'd like to ask you, what was the influence they possibly had on the written or animated characters? Did they have any influence?
I will say that, yes, they did have some influence, of course. And since they recorded over a series of time, and we always went to the recording sessions, the way that the actor was reading the lines would often inform how we wrote the lines. For instance, for Prince of Egypt, Steve Martin and Marty Short were playing the two high priests. And I knew that ahead of time, so I was writing with Steve Martin and Marty Short in mind. And actually, Jeffrey Katzenberg said, well, you know, these are the great improvisers of all time, so you don't really have to, you know, they'll make up their own roles. But why don't you write some stuff just in case? So I wrote like 20 pages of comic dialogue for the high priest. And of course, they didn't improvise one line. You know, they just read the script. But one of the high points of my career was Steve Martin coming to me afterwards and saying, oh, that was funny stuff. So I lived off of that for years and years and years. But the real influence for the characters are the animators. Eric Goldberg was one of the directors for Pocahontas. And you know him if you have seen Aladdin, because he is the genie. He animated the genie, and he looks like the genie. He's short, he's round, he's got the same facial features, the same expressions. Time and time again, the animator, and they're all cartoon characters, frankly. They all look like cartoon characters. They model the character on themselves, because they will act out the line, and then they'll look in a mirror, and then they'll draw, or nowadays, draw into the computer, what it looks like. So I would say, we always say that the animators are the true actors in an animated feature, more than the voices.
Yeah, and maybe just before I give you the mic to the audience, maybe I ask the last question of this part of our conversation about the remarkable lines, like the, you know, great lines, you know, you've written, like in Pocahontas, there is this line, I've seen hundreds of new worlds. What could possibly be different about this one? Yeah, and then there is a pause, and we know, and now you will get to know. So how do you compose those remarkable lines in a script? Do you know you need this accent here?
Well, really, it's not so much trying to think of the specific wording of dialogue as being absolutely crystal clear at this moment what the character wants, what the character needs, where the character is in the moment, and where the character wants to go. So for that line, for instance, and honestly, with the three people in the room, it's very difficult for me to remember who contributed what. I do, though there are a few things I remember. I came up with the name for Miko. They needed a name for the raccoon. I just went through and I looked up Indian words for raccoon. I found that. But for that specific line, we knew that John Smith's character had to be sort of cool, that he couldn't be overly emotional, that everything was going to be ironic and distant, and yet we had to get across that this guy who had been this wizened traveler, we had to get across the idea that he had seen a lot of new worlds, but that this was something new. So really the line comes out of character rather than trying to say, okay, we need a bang-up line for that. I do remember certain things like oddly enough, well, that was refreshing after I remember days and days and days of trying to come up with some funny line for him to say after he's hauled out of the sea. So it's not so bad now, but when we saw the film, of course, we saw the film hundreds of times, we couldn't really see the movie so much as see all the hours behind each individual line and each individual image that we had labor over.
Okay, so maybe if you agree, we could pass the audience to ask some questions. We cannot see much from here.
No, I can't say anything.
But yeah, I'm seeing the hands. So maybe if we could pass you the mic, it would be great to hear your questions. Yeah. Do we have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
oh, that
great.
helps.
Thank you for
that.
helps.
I got a question about because you had to like study a little bit of history and see about like the true story of Pocahontas, and I was wondering how did it feel to actually write this history like sugar-coated, of course, because it was Disney. It's a kids movie, but how did it kind of feel to like rewrite this and doing this from the perspective of like I don't know, white people writing something about a story as tragic as the one of Pocahontas?
Yeah, well, first of all, not too fond of the term sugar-coated, which people always refer to Disney as sugar-coating. It's really not fair. I mean, from the early days when Bambi's mother was shot in front of Bambi, or later on when Simba's father is trampled to death by gazelles. You know, in the Disney has never shied away from tough subjects, and so it wasn't so much trying to sweeten the story as even back then, back in the 90s, we're very well aware that we were sort of at the center of popular culture, that everybody was going to see this movie, that it meant a lot, that it had sort of political significance in addition to everything else. So we'd be very careful with our depiction of the Indians. And we had an Indian advisor, even, who was a Powhatan Indian, theoretically a descendant of Pocahontas every step of the way. So we did think consciously about portraying the Indians in a very good light. Even though I was always dying to put in the scenes which were actually historically accurate, where the Powhatan Indians would saw open the skulls of their living captives and pour boiling oil into it. But we were not allowed to do that. We had to be very good. But I will say that, yes, there's the historical Pocahontas, and then there's the Pocahontas that we came up with. The movie is historically accurate when it comes to sort of the background details, what the houses look like, the clothing, how the fort was constructed for Jamestown. All those were immaculately done. The story of Pocahontas from the very beginning was somewhat legendary. John Smith was a very unreliable narrator. He wrote 2 autobiographies. In his first autobiography, he didn't even mention the fact that he had been captured by the Indians and then about to have his head bashed in, and then Pocahontas saved his life. You'd think that he would remember that. But instead, that was a story that he came up in his second autobiography. So it's not even clear that that happened. So the story that everybody knows about Pocahontas, who was also 12 years old when she met John Smith, is a romance, and it really comes more from some Elvis Presley songs and some legends about. So when people thought they knew the story of Pocahontas, that's what they were thinking of. So we could make a documentary about what really happened with Pocahontas, or we could make a movie that worked with the audience. And we decided, and not that it was much of a decision, to go for what was dramatic, what we work with the audience. But it was risky because the big question was, well, should we give this a happy ending? Should we have Pocahontas wind up with John Smith? It is a big love story after. And we said that's too far from the true story of Pocahontas. We really felt we couldn't do that. She did go on to marry the father of the American tobacco industry and then moved to England. So when The Lion King came out and unexpectedly made $1 billion, Disney decided to go all out for the premiere of Pocahontas. They rented out Central Park in New York. They invited a couple 100,000 people. They sent out, tickets. They had a festival all day. They had a big concert with stars. And they put up 3 enormous screens and then showed the movie in front of 200,000 people. And we were sitting there on blankets, terrified out of our minds, because we had had one preview. We were showing a movie that had the first unhappy ending, where the guy and the girl did not wind up together, and we didn't know whether we were going to have a riot on our hands, whether we were going to be stoned out of the theater. And you look back and say, well, you're overreacting. But at the time, we really didn't know what the reaction would be. But it went fine. It went very well. And since then, it's accepted as sort of a satisfying conclusion to this love story. They'll remain united by the colors of the wind. But yeah, I would say that we took more risks than you'd think.
Even the date of the release, the cinema release, was exactly 400 years later than the Pocahontas' birth. So I think...
Well, that I didn't know.
Yeah. So... Yeah, I mean that the historical figure was important in this adaptation. Do we have any questions? Yeah, many hands. So please wave to us that we could... Yeah.
Dzień dobry.
Okay, great. Prosimy.
Dzień dobry, nazywam się Michał Swarlik. Aha, przepraszam.
Dobra, to najpierw pan, potem pani, tak?
Może pani najpierw.
Ja mam najpierw?
No dobrze, prosimy.
Hi, I just want to at first send you a very big thanks for this movie, because it's a very big part of my life, as I'm a 30 years old woman, and I watch it maybe 200 times already, and I really love it. But the question I wanted to ask you is, what is your secret to make a comedy? Because for me, it's very important to get to know the secret, how not to push something into not funny thing, but it's like pushed something, but it's not really funny. And that's the difference between something which is really funny and which is a comedy. So what is your secret? Can you share it?
Well, I don't know if it's a secret. I don't write jokes. And I don't write gags. My brother does. He's a writer for The Simpsons for many, many years. He can write lots and lots of jokes, but I don't do that. What I do, everything for me comes out of the character and out of the situation. And you have to treat comic situations as seriously as if it's a tragedy, because as a truism that the dividing line between tragedy and comedy is just razor thin. The minute that the character knows that they're doing something funny, then the humor disappears. The character has to take it absolutely seriously, and the stakes have to be just as high as if it was, Hamlet. But there's a little twist where there's a little ironic thing where the tension is expelled in laughter rather than tears. But I will say that many people have tried to analyze humor over the years, and the second you start to dissect humor, it dies a painful death. So ultimately, I can't really answer the question. You have to have a sense of humor and then get it down on paper. But I would say that the best humor does come out of real situations, characters, real emotions, and taking it absolutely dead seriously.
Thank you so much. To może teraz pan, tak?
Dobrze. Hello, my name is Michał Swarlik. I'm a cinema lover. I've got a question about a Polish song by Edyta Górniak in Polish Pocahontas. Have you heard that it's a very popular song in Poland and it's typical to play it on Polish weddings? Really? It's not a joke.
Yeah, so the question was about the Polish version of a song, Color of the Wind.
Yeah.
Have you heard that it's very popular?
I have heard it. It was news to me that Colors of the Wind was such a big hit in Poland when I first, many years ago, came to Poland. I was very surprised. And I mentioned this to Stephen Schwartz, and he didn't really know it either. It's funny how certain songs will gain some sort of purchase in different countries. But my understanding is it really is because of the singer. That was a big part of why it became such a hit. But I'm very happy it is. And as I remember the first time I heard Colors of the Wind, as I said, the music was written by Alan Menken, but for some reason he wasn't there. And Stephen Schwartz, a great composer in his own right, was playing the piano part and singing. And we, at the end we said, well, that's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, in my opinion, this Polish version is so important. It was because of Edyta Górniak, who was at the moment the brightest star of a Polish pop musical singing. So, and it was just after she won the second prize at the Eurovision contest. So she was like the best person to sing this song.
And I think, was it Colors of the Wind that won Best Song that year I think it was Colors of the Wind that won Best Song at the Oscars.
Yeah, so I think we have a space for the last question.
Second question, please. Okay, it doesn't matter.
Hello. Hi, this way. Hi. Yeah, thanks first of all, thank you for being here and taking the time to talk to us, and it was a really insightful chat. My question is about something more kind of maybe technical. You mentioned that you got to the writing of Pocahontas in a way with your spec script. So what would you say an aspiring writer needs to have in their arsenal in terms of kind of like a ready to go? Like if there's anyone who wants to read something that you wrote, like what would you say they have to have in their desk already?
I'm not sure if I understood all the questions.
Sorry, yeah, you mentioned that you got into Pocahontas in a way with the spec script you wrote for the comedy show, for the comedy series. So other than the spec script, what would you say that a writer who aspires to become an actual writer and get hired should have in their arsenal other than the spec script? Like, would you say if you want to write for comedy, for animation, then does it have to be an animation script, or like what else would be of value to have kind of at hand?
So so the question is what should a writer do when you're starting out? Well, you write. You just write every day, and once you finish a script, you set that script down, and you set another. You start another script. It is somewhat different in Europe than it is in LA, in that the notion of the spec script doesn't really exist here. So if you're trying to make it into the TV world or even to sell a movie, writers will often write a sample script. And they don't even think that they'll necessarily get onto the screen, but it's a sample of their writing. Not done so much in Europe. Usually you sort of pitch an idea. The producer will say, well, why don't you try to write a treatment, and sort of starts off that way. But persistence, the main thing that a writer needs is to keep on writing no matter what, no matter all the pitfalls that may fall, and to try different genres, and always try to get your stuff put on in any venue imaginable. Nowadays, you can shoot with your phone a little film and put it on YouTube. Maybe 2 people see it, but that's 2 more people than no people, Or you can, start a little acting company and put on your own shows. Whatever you do, you just have to work as if it's your job, because in general, the hard work pays off. I to this day, I always try to be the hardest working person who goes into the room. If I go into a meeting, every single, moment of what I'm going to say I've written down and prepared in advance. You know, I prepare everything. So hard work, you know, hard work is generally what pays off.
So before we get back to our hard work, I have a little surprise for you. Yes. Yes, it's a little surprise, so I'm not sure if we are ready. Yes?
This is very scary.
Don't worry.
Ty masz mnie za głupią dzikuskę, lecz choć cały świat zwiedziłeś, zjeździłeś wzdłuż i wszerz i mądry jesteś tak, że aż słów podziwu brak. Dlaczego, powiedz mi, tak mało wiesz? Mało wiesz. Na lądzie, gdy rozglądasz się lądując, chcesz wszystko mieć na własność, nawet głaz. A ja wiem, że ten głaz ma także duszę. Imię ma i zaklęty w sobie czas. Ty myślisz, że są ludźmi tylko ludzie, których ludźmi nazywać chce twój świat. Lecz jeśli pójdziesz tropem moich braci, dowiesz się największych prawd, najświętszych prawd. Czy wiesz, czemu wilk tak wyje w księżycową noc? I czemu ryś tak zęby szczerzy rad? Czy powtórzysz tę melodię, co z gór płyną? Barwy, które kolorowy niesie wiatr. Barwy, które kolorowy niesie wiatr.
Well, that was lovely. Thank you very much. You all certainly know the song a lot better than I do. I will say, because it's very short, I will hang out in the lobby. I'm happy to have anybody who wants to come up and ask more questions or talk to have a chance.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. We have to wrap it up. And thank you for that wonderful film. It's also a big chunk of my childhood.
Thank you. Thank you.